I'll take a minute to tell you my love story, right? I was 28, 29 years old, had worked in the US for about 4, 5 years then, had decent money, was much better and much more good looking than now, right? In fact, people said I looked like Ajay Jadeja at that time. If you, no, today I look like Rajmouli, right? And I liked a girl in our office, right? So we quoted for a while, and then I said, "Look, I want to marry you." We didn't have any other challenges. Both well educated, fairly making some money. As luck would have it, she's from the same community that I am from, so there was no reason why somebody should say no to our marriage. She said, "Fine, come talk to my father." Right? And I was a super confident guy. I knew exactly. I'd watched enough movies of how to go and ask the father for his daughter. I had the list of questions. I had my answers ready. Decent job, just US returns. So there was nothing to say no for. Right. Um, it was a Sunday evening, and I went to their house. Age-old man, about around his 60s. But I knew what to tell him. And that's when I realized I don't know how to tell him what I came to tell him. Because that was the first person that I met who was deaf. He can't hear, he can't speak. Here I am preparing for almost 2 days, 3 days on what to talk to him. And then I'm like, okay, how do I tell him this now? That was the first deaf person I met in my life. Fortunately, he knew why a 30-year-old guy would come at 6 o'clock in the evening along with his daughter, right? So we got married. And as I started interacting with him and my mother-in-law, who was also deaf, right? I realized here's a world, or here is a community that I have never seen in my life. And we just don't tend to recognize or acknowledge that they exist. Now, any other disability, whether it is somebody who cannot see, somebody who cannot walk, or any other cerebral palsy, autism, the minute you see a person, you know his wiring is different. In some cases, you can experience the disability. All you have to do is close your eyes, and you can experience what a blind person goes through all through the day. But unfortunately, ears are tuned such a way that if you're a hearing person, you cannot experience deafness. The closest you can get is when you get on an aircraft or get down an aircraft and you have that tinge in your ear for 5 minutes. Now imagine that a person having all through their life, 24/7. Very irritating, right? So I started interacting with the community. Things that you and I take for granted that we have access to, a deaf person does not have access to. You book an Ola, the guy lands up, he calls. For a deaf guy, that doesn't make sense, right? You want to buy something on a credit card, the bank calls back to check if the transaction is valid. Press 1 to approve the transaction. For the deaf guy, it can't work, right? Simple things. There's a deaf person inside a house alone. There's a person knocking on the door. They won't know. They are in a hotel room. They want to order food. They can't. So everything that you and I take for granted, a deaf person has to struggle to do that, right? There are 3 myths that every time I make a presentation or I interact with the hearing community, they say, but they can read, no? Right? Can you read this? That's a picture of a French cuisine called caviar, right? And what is written down there is French. You can guess from some words like lux, gastronomy, cuisine, that it means something about that French cuisine called caviar being a delicacy to eat, right? But the actual translation of it is caviar is bad for health. Don't eat it. Like how you, in this slide, were able to join a few words and figure out that it is something about caviar, about being a delicacy. The actual reality is different. Similarly, for a deaf person, English or any other spoken language is not a natural language. They can guess some words, right? But for them, sign language is the natural language, which comes naturally to them, right? So they can lip read, correct? Any guesses how difficult lip reading is? Did you guess what I could say? It's just guesswork, right? So lip reading doesn't work. Now closed captions. There is this new fancy thing saying to make things accessible for a deaf guy, you just have to put closed captions or subtitles and everything is hunky dory. Look at this closed caption: machine gun fire like laughter. What does it even mean? So it doesn't work, right? Closed captions are not the best way. But when you meet a deaf person, well, how do you call them? How do you address them? There are so many words: speech and hearing impaired, deaf, hard of hearing, differently abled, God's given gift, specially abled, so many other words. But what is the right way to address a deaf person? Any guesses? Just plain deaf. Or better still, right? Let's say I want to explain him. Would you just stand up? I want to explain him. Should I call him 5 feet 4 inch guy with a beard and a hair which goes from right to left, wearing a white shirt? No, I have a name for him, right? His name is Karan. So the best way to address a deaf person is by his name, not because he's deaf. Put the person in front and not the disability in front. Make sense? So we started this organization about 4 years ago. It's called Yunikee. While it is spelled Yunikee, we pronounce it Yunikee, right? Yunikee in some form in Telugu means existence. I exist, right? There are 60 million deaf people in the country and 700 million deaf people across the world. And nobody tends to acknowledge their existence. So when we started this organization, we wanted to make sure that the rest of the hearing world acknowledges that there is this community that we have to look at, which is why Yunikee. Again, deafness is not a 0 and 1. It's a spectrum, like autism, right? You can be mildly deaf, moderately deaf, severe deaf, and profound deaf, depending on a lot of factors. Why does deafness happen? For any reason. My father-in-law became deaf because when he was pulled out while being born, the doctor, instead of holding the forceps here, held it around the ear. Gus. My mother-in-law had jaundice at the age of 3. She went deaf. Right? A friend of mine who is deaf, all he was doing was playing outside his house. He was hearing. He was about 5-6 years old. He was hearing. A lorry tire burst. He went deaf. Now here's the scary part. All of us can go deaf with age. A mild infection, anything, right, could make us go deaf. Unfortunately, 98% of deaf children drop out of schools in their 10th class. Because after 10th, there are no schools which teach them subjects in sign language. Right? Today you have Hindi medium, Telugu medium, Malayalam medium, Kannada, English, so many other mediums through which you learn science, maths, and other subjects. But there are no schools or colleges which teach them in a language that they can understand. 98% of them drop out. What does that do? They get low paid jobs, like people who can box in warehouses like Flipkart. I'm sure you've seen deaf guys in cafe coffee days being janitors. And that's how they continue their life all through their lives. But their aspirations are just like you and mine. Just because they don't speak the same language you and I do doesn't mean they are cognitively disabled. You would feel the same tomorrow if all of us are shipped to Shanghai. We won't know a word of Mandarin, correct? But does that make us stupid? Does that make us dumb? No. And it brings a downward spiral of effects. Because I don't have a good job, I won't get married. Because I'm not married, I'll have social loneliness. Because I have social loneliness, it'll impact my health. Then I go through depression. Then I go through relationships. It's just going down one after the other, right? And that's what a deaf guy, most of the deaf guys feel all through their lives. But at the root cause of it, there are just three reasons why we can't integrate, or we seem to find a challenge integrating a deaf person into our mainstream communities. One, identifying deafness at the right time, right? When a child is born, we check if he has all the five toes correctly, if he's able to see clearly. But most doctors don't check if he's able to hear. Second is there is no community awareness, because we hardly see a deaf person, right? And even if we see a deaf person, we tend to avoid conversations with him. We don't know how to communicate with him. Now, 25, 30 years ago, all of us had the same problem, right? Today, our people are moving from north to south, west to east a lot more. But I bet 25, 30 years ago, people from Tamil Nadu hardly knew any Hindi. Or people from North India hardly knew that, in fact, there were 4 states down there, is what they wouldn't know, right? But today, we all know more than one language. And therefore, we are able to communicate. But the minute you meet a person who you're not able to talk to, you tend to distance yourself. So what we do at Yunikee is work on this in a 6-pronged approach. One is first identify the deaf child at the right time. 2, create community awareness programs for the parents, teachers, Anganwadi members, doctors, and a whole lot of people who interact with a deaf person to be able to understand what deafness is and why language acquisition is absolutely important for the child. 3, we create accessible educational content, which means the same subjects, algebra, trigonometry, whether we use it in our lives or not, is still taught in sign language. 4, we provide parental support for the parents of deaf children, because 99% of deaf children are born to hearing parents, right? And 5, we create skilling programs for the deaf guys to be able to have a livelihood of their choice, not what we force fit them into, right? What we have seen in the last few years is, okay, you're deaf, I'll teach you tailoring, or I'll teach you welding, or I'll teach you cutting, right? And therefore, this is a job for you, or I'll teach you how to box. The guy wants to be a web developer. The guy wants to be a cinematographer. The guy wants to be an engineer. Why should we be the ones to box a certain person's aspiration just because of language as a barrier? So as unique challenges, I said, right? In-flight safety instructions. Your cabin crew members are so hell-bent that we all learn the safety instructions properly. But for a deaf guy, none of that is accessible. Hotel rooms, like I said, credit cards, food ordering apps, they're not eligible for health insurance. Did we know that? Yeah. If you're deaf, you're not eligible for health insurance. Here I am, every March, the same insurance company calls me over and over again, trying to sell more to me, whereas 60 million of them is a market space that these guys are sitting on, and they don't want to sell to them. Participation in elections, right? The hot topic right now. Everybody is promising guarantees left, right, and center. A deaf guy doesn't have an idea of who's guaranteeing what. Imagine if somebody made that same content in sign language, the votes would all go there. Essentially, over the last 3 to 4 years, we've been able to impact about 15,000 deaf young adults to be able to build a skill, have a livelihood, and improve their mental health. Right? To me, 15,000 seems large in 4 years. Right? Yes? No? Yes? Okay, let me do the other side of math. I said 60 million, right? Now do that as a fraction of percentage, 15,000 over 60 million. The road is way too long to go. And like you and I, today, these are all deaf guys, by the way, right? We have programmers, we have entrepreneurs, we have lawyers, engineers, models, teachers, YouTubers, just like you and me. And you can't tell the difference if somebody is deaf or not. In fact, that second girl on the top right, that's Nupur. She runs a bakery in Bombay. She runs a furnishing store, and she's a YouTuber. She's acted in a Netflix series, so on and so forth. Just because she's deaf, her aspirations haven't stopped. What can we do, right? As a hearing community, what is it that you and I can do to be a part of this social change? First, learn sign language. That's the basic, right? If I don't know the language you are speaking, then you can't express anything. Madam, you were talking about girl children getting married and all that, right? I have n number of deaf children who have the same problem, but they don't know who to talk to, right? Physical health. 11-year-old or a 12-year-old girl attains puberty. She doesn't know what is happening to her body. She can't ask her parents because she can't express. There's nobody else to ask. She doesn't know how to handle it. It's a pity. And there are no avenues to help her explain how to take care of herself. Right? Okay. So I'll just close with one simple sign, right? Who wants to try signing a simple sentence? Yeah. Your word is how are you? How do you sign that? Yeah, please. See, okay, you try and then I'll explain. Okay, that's one way of doing it. You how, right? Okay. How are you? This is how are you, right? I'm fine. Very simple. Sign language is very native and intuitive to all of us. You're hungry. How do you say you're hungry? Right? You want water. How do you say you want water? So we don't have to do anything specific to learn sign language. You just stop talking, your body will kick in the language automatically. And here's my favorite, right? And for this, you don't even have to sign. I'll make a gesture to him and let's see who can guess. Let's go. And for what is it for? Suttavrik. Correct. Yeah, that's it from me. Thanks for your time and thanks for TALTalks to give it an opportunity.